Does the ghost of Willie Larsman still haunt a section of land located 12 miles south of Valley City along the Cheyenne River?
Well, if you believe in the supernatural, it's a spook that scares horses. Otherwise, it's something that has persisted in this area for 82 years that frightens horses.
The legend of Willie Larsman began on November 2nd, 1916, when he was killed over a land dispute near a shallow crossing along the Cheyenne River. Ever since, mysterious things have happened there.
This is what my grandma told me about all this. Anytime they had to cross the ford in the river, the horses would get to the spot where Willie died and would bolt and run away. And she used to stay down in the house when they were raising small chickens, and she said she'd hear all sorts of noises in the house.
Today, horses still avoid the site of the shooting.
I came along about 50 years after this had happened and had a horse. And my first horse, I couldn't get within 200 yards of the place. My second horse was okay until I got where the ford was on the other side of the river. And then the third horse I was riding here, and she bolted and ran away here. So it's a ghost that scares horses.
Norma Duppler has a theory about why horses still get spooked on land Larsman used to own.
He was known to be not a real nice man, mean to people, mean to horses. And in fact, he got a mail order bride, and when he got angry at her, he'd go outside and kill her cats.
Skeletal remains have been found here that seem to support stories about Larsman's unsavory reputation.
When I was about 12 or 13, I was out horseback riding on some of Willie Larsman's old land, and I happened to find this skull not so far from his house. It's kind of obvious that this horse had been shot through the head between the eyes, and it's also pretty obvious it was one of Willie's horses.
Norma now owns this land and says she's not afraid of ghosts, but for unexplained reasons, certain steeds just don't like to horse around here. For Meyer Television News, I'm Cliff Naylor.
Graveyards are often the site for a lot of tales of Halloween hauntings, real or imagined.
Tonight in part 2 of our series on North Dakota ghost stories, we travel to the small town of Buffalo, located about 35 miles west of Fargo, to investigate some strange sightings in a city cemetery.
The tragic death of a young boy on October 11, 1907, still haunts the Buffalo Cemetery.
A lot of kids in town think that it's haunted. There are different stories about one about Mrs. Moore.
Emma Moore's son, David, was critically injured when a train ran over his leg as he was crossing the railroad tracks in Buffalo. He was rushed to a hospital in Fargo, but died before his mother could say goodbye.
It was a terrible loss, and I think that they say that the family never really got over it.
After David's burial, Mrs. Moore planted hundreds of flowers to beautify his grave and the rest of the cemetery. Some people in town say that to this day, her presence can still be felt here.
I've heard both from kids around town that either on October 11th, the night that David died, or the day that David died, and on Halloween night, if you come out to the cemetery at midnight, you can see Mrs. Moore walking around the cemetery or planting flowers out here at midnight.
During Mrs. Moore's lifetime, she planted so many flowers here, it was known as the most beautiful cemetery between Minneapolis and Seattle. During the summer, when thousands of flowers are in bloom, it's easy to see why this graveyard grew a rosy reputation. But what about its reputation for being haunted?
I don't know. It's stories. You don't know what to believe and what not to.
Tomorrow night, in part 3 of our series on North Dakota ghost stories, I'll travel off the beaten path to Lincoln Valley to tell you about one of the state's historic ghost towns. For Meyer Television News, I'm Cliff Naylor.
Ghost town, that's described as a place where no one lives anymore. Lincoln Valley fits that description. In part 3 of our series on North Dakota ghost stories, reporter Cliff Naylor traveled off the beaten path to Sheridan County to tell us what became of this town that was once a bustling village.
The road that leads into Lincoln Valley is now a lonely trail. But back when this town was founded at the turn of the century, Main Street was a busy place.
I remember as a small child coming here on Wednesday nights and Saturday nights. Those were the nights that the stores were open, and I can recall cars being parked diagonally down the center of Main Street, and then cars parked along either edge of Main Street, and it was a very bustling, thriving place.
Greg Doctor was baptized in the Lutheran Church here and grew up in the area. He says the population of Lincoln Valley, which never amounted to more than 100, started declining when the railroad bypassed the community. But he says it was the automobile that created this ghost town.
Lincoln Valley being situated halfway between Denoff and Animus, in the days before the automobile, when horses were the mode of transportation and wagons, this was the place to come to get supplies and so on. But as the automobile became more popular, that focus shifted away.
Today, half a dozen houses, the old beer hall, and a church are still standing. No one has lived here since 1972, and while abandoned buildings can be spooky at times, Greg says no one has ever seen any ghosts here. Tomorrow night, we'll conclude our series on North Dakota ghost stories by telling you about a murder mystery that is still causing a stink in the town of Buffalo. For Meyer Television News, I'm Cliff Naylor.